Today we're breaking down the best supplements and peptides to get you shredded. Now it goes without saying, nothing I'm about to share in this video will replace a calorie deficit. Energy balance is still king, along with proper training, sleep, and recovery. But if you already have those dialed in, these tools will make fat loss far more efficient, help you hold on to more muscle, and get better results from the work you're already putting in. So we got 9 total we're going to go over, each having a pretty robust effect on fat loss. So let's start with caffeine, which is one of the most well-researched compounds in the context of fat loss. For one, it increases catecholamines and activates the sympathetic nervous system, leading to a modest rise in thermogenesis. That is just a slight increase in caloric expenditure for several hours after consumption. It also has appetite suppressing effects. Again, these are going to be in the short term, but they can definitely help with adherence to a caloric deficit. For example, my approach during fat loss phases, I tend to intermittent fast, so I'll fast in the morning. During that time, throw in some nicotine gum and caffeine, and not only will that lock me in, have a nootropic effect, get some good solid work done, but it also suppresses my appetite during that fasted window. Now, almost more importantly, caffeine helps preserve training performance during fat loss phases, because when energy intake is reduced, we're eating less food, we can see declines in strength, potentially energy, and sometimes motivation as well, which are quite common. But if you take a good pre-workout, caffeine can almost offset these effects by increasing the amount of effort you can put into your training, and has also been shown to reduce the perceived exertion during training. So it will help you maintain training intensity, and that will support the retention of lean muscle mass, a critical variable for maintaining resting metabolic rate and improving your body composition over time. However, it's important to note caffeine can definitely be a double-edged sword for fat loss. If you're going wild with it, you're having, caffeine in the morning with a coffee, then you're having another hit of caffeine, then you're having another pre-workout later in the day, it will almost certainly interfere with your recovery. So if you're, like I said, having like 3 servings of caffeine throughout the day, that's a little bit high depending on how much is in each serving, but consuming it late in the day will disrupt your sleep. It will elevate cortisol and honestly never allow your body to get in a parasympathetic or rest and digest state, all of which will negatively impact fat loss. So we got to play a balancing act with caffeine. So to apply it effectively for fat loss, first, I use it either in the morning during that fasting window or during training sessions to support performance and drive muscle retention. Now, in terms of dose, we want to stay around 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, and that's around where you should hover. Definitely cut it off at 2 p.m., ideally 12 p.m., and I'd personally cycle off periodically to maintain caffeine sensitivity and minimize the downregulation of adenosine receptors, which is how caffeine works. It essentially blocks the buildup of adenosine. Next on the list, we have Berberine, which is one of the few non-prescription supplements that has a measurable impact on not only glucose metabolism, but also body composition. Now, mechanistically, it activates AMPK, which is often referred to as a cellular energy sensor, and it's the same molecular pathway activated by caloric restriction, exercise, as well as fasting. All well-known levers for improving body composition and metabolic health. So essentially, berberine improves insulin sensitivity, it can reduce hepatic glucose production, and it improves glucose disposal, particularly in individuals with impaired metabolic function. So berberine can support fat loss indirectly by reducing insulin levels, stabilizing our blood glucose, and improving the partitioning of nutrients, meaning more energy, more of what you consume, is directed towards muscle tissue and less towards body fat. Now, in terms of dosing, the standard protocol is 500 milligrams taken 1 to 3 times per day with meals, so 500 milligrams to 1500 milligrams per day. However, there are GI side effects people can get, like bloating, cramping, mild nausea potentially, that are not uncommon during the first week or two, but they tend to resolve with continued use. And to minimize them or not get them entirely, I'd recommend starting at 500 milligrams once daily with a meal, and then you can gradually titrate up if need be all the way up to 1500 milligrams. Next, we have the combination of green tea extract and caffeine. Now, green tea extract alone is relatively mild in its effects, but when we pair it with caffeine, we create a synergistic response that supports fat oxidation, appetite control, and energy availability, especially when in a caloric deficit. So the primary active compounds in green tea are catechins, particularly EGC, which if you get a green tea extract sup, you'll likely see that on it. And these inhibit catecholomethyltransferase, COMT, you may have heard of that, an enzyme responsible for breaking down norepinephrine and other catecholamines. So this then slows the degradation of caffeine and prolongs its stimulatory effect on the central nervous system as well as adipose tissue. So basically, green tea extract extends and almost smooths out the stimulant response from caffeine, helping sustain the fat oxidation effects you can get, even though they're mild, and the mental clarity you get, especially from caffeine, over several hours. And it can prevent a sharp crash that you usually get, say, if you didn't take it. Now, from a body composition perspective, what we care about, green tea and the addition of caffeine can slightly increase fat oxidation, particularly when taken in a fasted state. Again, it can have appetite suppressing effects, especially in the early part of the day, which is fantastic. And it somewhat increases thermogenesis through sympathetic activation of our nervous system. Same thing caffeine does on its own. Now, commonly studied and effective combination in terms of dose is 300 milligrams of a green tea extract with 100 to 200 milligrams of caffeine taken fasted in the morning, or you could take it pre-training. Next on the list, we have fish oil, which is quite often just thought of as a general health supplement. Maybe you hear it's good for cardiovascular function, brain health, inflammation, your overall omega-3 to 6 ratio, but it also has direct implications, which is really cool, for body composition as well as metabolic rate. In a recent study, participants consumed 3 grams per day of combined EPA and DHA, which is the active omega-3 fatty acids, in fish oil for 12 weeks. Important to note, the control group received a caloric equivalent dose of olive oil, so the comparison did control for the caloric content, and the outcomes were pretty damn cool in my opinion. The fish oil group saw a 14% increase in resting metabolic rate, 10% higher energy expenditure during exercise, 30% increase in fat oxidation, and a 4% increase in lean muscle mass. So fish oil is helping us build muscle as well, and all of this occurred without any changes to training. So how does fish oil work to achieve these outcomes? Well, mechanistically, omega-3s enhance mitochondrial function as well as fat oxidation. They improve muscle protein synthesis signaling pathways. They reduce systemic inflammation, which can improve insulin sensitivity as well as recovery. And they can possibly influence nutrient partitioning, directing, again, more energy towards muscle tissue or calories, towards muscle, and less towards body fat. So on to dosing when it comes to fish oil. Just mimic the study. 3 grams per day of EPA and DHA, ideally from a high-quality triglyceride-based fish oil supplement, not an ethyl ester form. And look for a product that clearly lists the combined EPA and DHA content, not just fish oil, to ensure you're getting the effective dose. And a quick note, I'd also take it with meals for optimal absorption. Next on the list, we have L-carnitine, which is an amino acid that helps transport fat into the mitochondria to then be burned. So to quickly break down the fat loss process into some simple steps, so this makes a little more sense. This is a slight oversimplification, but we have essentially 3 steps in the fat loss process. We have fat mobilization, which is when the fat is released from the fat cell. We then have transportation of that fat into the mitochondria. Then we have oxidation, where that fat is then burned for energy. So L-carnitine supports that second step. It almost acts like a taxi to get our fat into the mitochondria so it can then be burned. Now, why is this beneficial? Well, when you're in a caloric deficit, your body is essentially forced to dip into its fat stores to make up for the energy shortfall, but simply mobilizing that fat from the fat cell doesn't guarantee it will be burned, make its way into the mitochondria essentially, without adequate transportation and oxidation. So that fat can actually be potentially restored. And this is where L-carnitine comes into play because, again, to summarize quite simply, L-carnitine assists in fat loss by assisting in the transportation of fat that has already been mobilized out of the fat cell into the mitochondria to go ahead and be oxidized or burned for fuel. And the more efficient your body is at transporting and oxidizing fat, the better you'll feel during your fat loss phase. And it's worth mentioning, honestly, L-carnitine has several other benefits as well that are quite often overlooked because many people focus solely on its fat loss properties, but this amino acid derivative has applications far beyond burning fat. For starters, L-carnitine is incredibly beneficial for heart health. It's involved in lipid metabolism, helping to reduce oxidative stress on the heart. And this makes it useful for people looking to optimize cardiovascular function as well, especially when you take it before bed if you want that outcome, as this is when the body is in its most restorative parasympathetic state. Now, another area where L-carnitine is pretty cool is enhancing androgen receptor density. Now, this is a bit more sciencey, but androgen receptors are what your testosterone, whether you're natural or assisted, binds to in order to exert its effects on muscle growth and performance. So by increasing the density and sensitivity of these receptors, L-carnitine can potentially allow you to get more out of the testosterone you already have. And recovery is another area where L-carnitine makes a pretty cool impact. So after intense training sessions, your body accumulates something called acetyl groups that can actually contribute to neural fatigue and potentially delay recovery. L-carnitine comes in and can help clear these acetyl groups, allowing recovery to begin a little bit sooner and improving your overall readiness for your next session. Then L-carnitine also enhances your body's ability to utilize glucose. This means better carbohydrate management, improved glycogen storage, and ultimately better performance during your workouts. You got better performance, so if you're in a fat loss phase and operating on lower calories, this glucose optimization can make a huge difference in how you feel as well as perform, which will make a difference in how much muscle you retain or build throughout your diet. So how can we use L-carnitine and what forms should we use? Now, the bioavailability of oral L-carnitine, quite terrible. So I personally wouldn't waste your time on anything oral and would go the injectable route if you feel comfortable doing so, because the injectable bioavailability is 100% and the oral is like 14 to 18%. So you need to take like 3-4 grams to match a 500 milligram injectable dose. But it's completely up to you. I get injecting can be scary for some, but it's really not that deep. It's literally just an amino acid. Or you go oral, it will still work. You just have to take quite a bit more, and be aware of the TMAO conversion, which you could take allicin, which is an extract from garlic, to help mitigate that. So now let's come on to the dosing. So in the research on L-carnitine, a lot of it is done intravenously, and you'll see dosages north of 400 milligram. You rarely see below 300 milligram in these IV studies. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the minimum effective dose. Now, there is a consideration, because many of you will be sitting here thinking, okay, Oscar said that this is just an amino acid and it's very safe, so it's not really going to have any negative effects on my health. So should I just take as much of this as I can? Well, there are implications to the function of your thyroid at very high dosages of L-carnitine. So personally, I wouldn't exceed 600 milligrams of L-carnitine use per day. But with clients, I've seen good outcomes when adding it in from about the 250 milligram upwards marker. And my general preference, as is the case with any fat loss supplement or peptide we will cover in this video that can have physiological outcomes, although it is extremely safe, would be to start at the lower end of this recommended range, assess your fat loss, and if you do need more, you can add it in. And I would preferentially increase L-carnitine over something like Yohimbine, another natural fat loss supplement we'll get to. So anywhere between 250 to 500 milligrams. I've personally only ever gone as high as 500 milligrams with myself and clients, and the net fat loss result is more than enough. It's also worth mentioning that once L-carnitine stores are saturated intramuscularly, kind of like creatine, if you're using this for hypertrophy outcomes, like the way that it increases glucose disposal or upregulating the androgen receptor, then it's likely the timing has very little effect. Now, if you're using it for fat loss, which I assume you are, timing is really important. So the optimal time to take L-carnitine is 30 to 60 minutes before fasted cardio or a workout. So upon waking, you could take your L-carnitine, then maybe 30 minutes later, only if it suits your schedule, you could maybe have a little coffee and then go out, get your steps in, or do your low intensity steady state cardio. So to summarize, injectable over oral between 250 and 500 milligrams per day is fine. I would take it upon waking. You want to take it fasted 30 to 60 minutes before cardio or your workout. And this is one of the most versatile and effective tools you can add to your fat loss supplement stack. It will support fat loss, obviously. It'll improve recovery in some respect. It'll enhance your androgen receptor activity. It'll optimize glucose utilization, and it also benefits heart health. So you could just use this year round. Just remember to choose the right form, time when you take it, and use it consistently for the best results. The next fat loss supplements we have available to us are Yohimbine and rauwolscine. Pretty common ones, you might have heard of them. Yohimbine, a compound which is pretty widely used in bodybuilding, competitive physique endeavors, or really just anyone trying to lose body fat. Yohimbine is an alpha-2 adrenergic receptor antagonist. Whole bunch of fancy words there. It sounds kind of technical, but if you remember, like we spoke about, we have the 3 stages of fat loss, like how the fat loss actually works. We have mobilization, we have transportation, then we have oxidation. Now, Yohimbine focuses on the mobilization phase, so it binds to alpha-2 adrenergic receptors in the fat cells and essentially blocks them. So what does that mean? These receptors are particularly dense in stubborn fat area places like, maybe potentially the lower back, hips, glutes, where fat is usually harder to lose. So Yohimbine, by blocking these receptors, can help free up fat that would be otherwise harder to mobilize. However, for Yohimbine to work effectively, you need to use it fasted. That's because the presence of insulin in your bloodstream blunts its effects. So for the best results, you should take Yohimbine in a fasted state and pair it with a non-glucose intensive activity. So this will look like walking outside or doing your low intensity cardio. But bear in mind that Yohimbine is a stimulant, and it does deliver a very strong sympathetic hit to your nervous system, so it puts your body into that fight or flight state, that side of our nervous system. Because of this, you should save it for periods where I feel it's absolutely necessary, like the final stages of a fat loss phase, because Yohimbine can be challenging to manage, especially if you're already taking other stimulants like caffeine. Simultaneously can very easily overload your nervous system, and that'll just lead to excessive fatigue, much slower recovery, and basically you will stall in towards your fat loss goals. So to avoid this, use Yohimbine sparingly and strategically. Now, one effective approach is to periodize your Yohimbine usage. So instead of taking it through your entire fat loss phase, you might want to deploy it once you've already lost the majority of your body fat, because again, it's an excellent tool for targeting those stubborn areas which often hold on to fat a little bit longer, and Yohimbine can help almost dig them out as like at the back end of your fat loss phase, so you don't really need it from the jump. Now let's talk about rauwolscine, which is also known as alpha Yohimbine or iso Yohimbine. And rauwolscine is often compared to Yohimbine because it works in a similar way. It's also an alpha-2 adrenergic receptor antagonist. It's not just Yohimbine under a different name. It's almost a superior compound in basically every way, because while Yohimbine can be effective, many people find it intolerable because of the side effects. Again, it's a very harsh stimulant. It can cause symptoms like jitterness, potentially hypoglycemia, anxiety for some. Personally, I did not like using Yohimbine for this very reason. It just gave me a weird feeling. Didn't feel good on it. But rauwolscine, on the other hand, offers a much, in my personal experience, a cleaner and more selective effect. So milligram for milligram, it's more potent than Yohimbine, meaning you can take a smaller dose and get better results from it. And the side effects are significantly less intense. Even though rauwolscine is still a stimulant, which is important to note, it doesn't leave you feeling like cracked out or anxious or like you're about to pass out during your workout, which is not fun if you've taken too much Yohimbine before, not an ideal spot to be in. So like Yohimbine, rauwolscine is most effective when taken fasted. Its fat mobilizing effects are blunted if, again, there's a presence of insulin in the bloodstream. So if you're going to use it after a meal, wouldn't bother. So again, you're planning to use rauwolscine or Yohimbine, pair it with I'd fasted, you wake up, fasted cardio, or a fasted walk to maximize its benefits. And I typically, in terms of dosing, use rauwolscine in a low dose around 3 milligrams before fasted steps or cardio, and that small amount is far more than enough to trigger significant fat burning effects without any of the jittery feelings that can come with Yohimbine. So just to summarize, while Yohimbine can be an effective tool for fat loss, it's not without its fair share of negatives. So if you're looking for honestly a better approach, I'd go with rauwolscine. But if you are going to use either, start small, see how you feel. If you're someone who is caffeine sensitive, I honestly wouldn't even bother. And I would save them for the end of your diet, the back end of your diet phase, because we want to be in a parasympathetic state, a rest and digest state, basically all day except when we're training, obviously to maximize our recovery. So if you throw in a harsh stimulant that puts you into a parasympathetic state for too long, or you combine too many on top of each other, that is a good recipe for disaster. So we've got Yohimbine, or preferably rauwolscine, to assist us with the mobilization part of the fat loss process. Then we got L-carnitine, so it assists us with the transportation phase of the fat loss process to get that fat into the mitochondria to then be burned or oxidized. Next, we have quite the hot one at the moment, Retatrutide, which is a triple receptor agonist. So it hits GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptors at the same time. So compared to Ozempic or semaglutide, which just hits GLP-1, or tirzepatide, which hits GLP-1 and GIP, Retatrutide hits 3 pathways. So first we have GLP-1, which slows gastric emptying, it suppresses appetite and improves insulin secretion. Then there's GIP, which supports insulin release and plays a role in fat metabolism as well. Then what Retatrutide adds is the glucagon receptor activation, which slightly increases energy expenditure and fat oxidation. So it is still in phase 3 trials right now, which is definitely worth mentioning, with full data on cardiovascular outcomes as well as direct comparisons against tirzepatide expected to come out soon. And assuming no unexpected safety issues come up, it's likely going to move into full clinical use after that. In terms of effect, it appears to produce more weight loss than both semaglutide and tirzepatide, which makes sense since it combines all 3 pathways. However, the most important thing to understand here is that the quality of weight loss depends on what you're doing while you're on the drug or any of the GLP-1 agonists, because appetite suppression can make it very, very easy to undereat, which is where you risk losing muscle. And this is why hitting at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight and sticking to a solid resistance training program, training at least around 3 to 5 times per week, is a non-negotiable. because the goal isn't just to eat as little as possible, it's to reduce some of that food noise or all of it entirely to make adherence to your deficit easier while still fueling training and recovery so you hold on to muscle. So when it comes to dosing, I'd start low around 1 milligram per week. It's a good place to start to begin, and only increase if you're no longer getting the desired appetite suppression. If it's working, there's absolutely no need to increase the dose, and it's also worth mentioning some people find microdosing around 2 to 4 times per week a little bit more tolerable than taking the full weekly dose at once. Now, when it comes to these drugs, ethically, there is some debate about whether they should be used outside of medical necessity. And my view on this is pretty simple. So if someone struggles with hunger, or they really struggle with their weight, they struggle with, let's say, cravings, potentially binging post-diet, which is a very common scenario, and this helps them stay consistent with their training and nutrition, it can be a very valuable tool, even life-changing for some. But it's definitely not a shortcut. It just removes one of the biggest barriers to getting lean and staying lean, and I think they're definitely going to change the landscape of the physique development world and hand people back a lot more control. Now, last but not least, we have Mots-c, which is probably one of the most fascinating peptides, in my opinion, we have when it comes to fat loss, glucose metabolism, as well as insulin resistance. Now, Mots-c is encoded by your mitochondrial DNA. It's something your body actually makes naturally, and one of its primary roles is triggering mitochondrial biogenesis, which means it signals your body to essentially make more mitochondria and make the ones you already have work better. Now, how does that help us with fat loss? Well, when it comes to fat loss, mobilizing fat, again, 3 steps is only step 1. If you don't have enough mitochondria, or they're potentially dysregulated, that fat can just get restored. It's not going to be oxidized or burned for fuel. So Mots-c increases the capacity to oxidize fat so that what you mobilize actually gets burned or oxidized for fuel. Mots-c also naturally gets released as a direct response to movement. And in many ways, you can think of it as an exercise signal that tells your body to utilize fuel better. And we've seen this in human research. Researchers actually took a group of sedentary people and had them do just a few hours of light activity, nothing crazy. And when they tested before and after, muscle biopsies showed a 12-fold increase in Mots-c. 12-fold. That means this peptide is already being produced by your body. You kind of just have to move to unlock it. So what does it actually do? Well, this is where it gets pretty cool. Mots-c improves the efficiency of your mitochondria, the powerhouse of your cells, and even encourages your body to make more of them, like we spoke about, mitochondrial biogenesis. Now, more mitochondria means a higher capacity to burn fat, not just to release fat from storage, but to actually burn it for fuel instead of restoring it. It also flips on key energy sensors like AMPK and sirtuin-1, the same ones that get activated when you exercise or go into a caloric deficit. Now, mechanistically, it does this by altering the folate and purine cycles, which essentially tricks your body into thinking it's in an energy demanding state, and that'll result in more efficient fuel use and more mitochondrial output as well. Now, in terms of fat loss, the whole point of this video, the data is quite compelling. In rodent models, Mots-c blocked the development of insulin resistance that typically comes with high fat, high calorie diets. Glucose control improved dramatically. Inflammation markers like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6 dropped, appetite went down, and then body weight followed. And here's what makes this especially interesting. Those effects were even stronger when the animals being studied were on a good diet and exercising. That means Mots-c works synergistically with good nutrition and training to make the results even better. Then from a muscle standpoint, Mots-c lowered myostatin by about 40%, which is pretty cool. Myostatin being the protein that essentially tells your body, tells your muscles to stop growing. So lowering it gives you a little bit more room to build or at least preserve muscle while dieting. And it even blocked obesity-related muscle atrophy, which means it can help protect your lean tissue. Now, as for dosing, most human protocols are still based on early research and clinical experience, but the common range is 5 to 10 milligrams via a subcutaneous injection, 1 to 3 times per week. It's often run for 4 to 8 weeks at a time, but just like every supplement or drug or peptide, Mots-c is not a shortcut. If your nutrition, your recovery, your sleep are just out the window, they're horrible, pushing your mitochondria harder can actually make things potentially worse. You're almost going to be pouring gas on a fire. So you need the foundation first. That means consistent training. Again, 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep. You're managing inflammation. You're eating a nutrient-dense diet. You're following good lifestyle habits. Then once those are locked in, you implement something like Mots-c, you're going to really get the most out of it. So zooming out, Mots-c can improve our ability to burn fat, It can give us more energy when dieting, which is a big one. It can improve performance, and it can help us preserve muscle when in a calorie deficit. So get the fundamentals in place, get those dialed in, then use this as a tool to take those fundamentals and your fat loss to the next level. And that's it. 9 tools you can add to your fat loss phase. We went over caffeine, berberine, caffeine plus green tea, fish oil, L-carnitine, Yohimbine, rauwolscine, Retatrutide, and Mots-c. But again, I want to say none of this replaced the basics. Energy balance determines what direction you will go, as well as training and recovery. So that'll do 90% of the work. These just make the process a little bit more smoother, faster, a little bit of a cheat code, some of them. Get more out of what you're already doing. So if you want my exact fat loss blueprint, your macros set up for you, 2 options for free training plans, 4 times per week and 5 times per week. You can grab my free 30-day transformation series. That's the first link below. If you want my help personally, you can apply for one-on-one coaching. That's down there too. And if you want to potentially dive deeper into this stuff, check out the OS podcast, as well as discount codes for the supplements I use every day, all linked below. I'm going to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace.